Good morning, everybody. It is 7 o'clock. Very welcome to join us on The Breakfast Show. This morning, a train crash in Greece. That's our top story. Dozens have been killed. The latest on the missing baby in Brighton, live from the scene. And Sky News goes undercover to investigate the craze of laughing gas bought from corner shops for kicks. Plus, a denial from a former health secretary about an allegation concerning the COVID pandemic. On today's show, we're also talking to the leader of the Ulster Unionist Party, Doug Beattie, to get his reaction to the PM's Brexit deal. And we'll get Labour's view from the shadow Chief Secretary to the Treasury, Pat McFadden. It's Wednesday, 1st of March, St David's Day. A nightmarish 10 seconds. Witnesses describe their horror as two trains collide in Greece, killing more than 30 people. New images of runaway couple Constance, Marten and Mark Gordon moments before their arrest as more than 200 officers search for their 2-month-old baby. The undercover Sky News investigation into laughing gas that shows buying it from a corner shop is as easy as getting a loaf of bread.
All but one of the stores we went into simply handed over these canisters, and even though they didn't ask our producer any questions, they also handed over the balloons used to inhale the gas from these.
Finally, the ruling party candidate Bola Tinubu has won Nigeria's presidential election, but already the opposition candidates are calling for a revote. We're live in Lagos. 700 years of history. We reveal how the coronation chair has received a makeover, ready for the big day in May. How empty are the shelves in your supermarket? We'll speak to the boss of Iceland on the fruit and veg situation. Plus, we'll cook up a dish using substitutes for what you can't get. Good morning, everyone. 32 people have been killed and at least 85 injured in a head-on train crash in Greece. Emergency services say the passenger train was travelling from Athens to Thessalonica when it hit a freight train. The collision happened near the Greek municipality of Tempe, some 235 miles from Athens. Some of the casualties were taken to hospital in the nearby city of Larissa. Siobhan Robbins has more.
Twisted and broken, carriages derailed. These are the remains of a Greek train after one of the deadliest crashes in decades. It was just before midnight near the city of Larissa when an intercity service collided with a freight train. In the dark, passengers described panic, screaming, an impact which they say felt like an earthquake. 4 of the carriages came off the tracks before several caught fire.
The first sight was scary because there were many big pieces of steel. The trains were completely destroyed, both the passenger and freight trains. The passenger train was going about 160 kilometers per hour, and there was a clear head-on collision. People were scared, very scared actually. They were looking around, searching. They didn't know where they were.
The passenger train had been travelling from Athens to Thessaloniki when it happened. As rescuers tried to free the reported 350 people on board, the army has been called in to help. Many of the injured are being treated in Larissa, with 2 other hospitals on high alert. It's still too early to say what caused this crash, one of the worst in Greek history.
Siobhan's running by for us. Siobhan, the people in the first 2 carriages didn't stand a chance, did they?
Really horrific scenes coming out of Greece this morning after this crash just before midnight last night. As I said in the report, it's believed that the trains collided head-on and were going at high speed when that happened. And you can see from the pictures of the scene just how devastating that impact was. Several of the carriages have derailed, one of them lying almost at a 90-degree angle to the rest of the train. And passengers on board describe screaming a nightmarish 10 seconds. They said one man talks about having to use his suitcase to break the window of the train to try and get out. Now, this crash happened near to where another devastating crash happened in the 1970s, and some people are saying this is more evidence that Greeks need to update their train system.
OK, for now, thank you. Search continuing in Brighton for that missing baby of the aristocrat Constance, Marten and Mark Gordon. A couple have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter and are being held by police in Sussex. Aisha standing by for us this morning. Aisha, do the police think this baby's still alive?
Well, the search operation continues. Police yesterday said that they, given the risk of the situation, they must consider the possibility the baby may well have come to harm, but they say they are still hopeful. But of course, overnight we've had more freezing temperatures here, sub-zero temperatures. The concern continues to grow over the well-being of the 2-month-old baby, because it's important to remember, first of all, it's never received any medical attention. But on top of that as well, the last 2 months it's been the police believe that Constance, Marten, Mark Gordon and the baby had been camping in open land in all sorts of temperatures. So there is the possibility that the baby may well have been exposed to the elements. So they're going to be pushing on with the search today. They have thrown lots and lots of resources at the search. Over 200 police officers are involved, and that's across the Metropolitan Police and Sussex Police. They've got various additional resources, including the use of drones, police helicopters, sniffer dogs and thermal imaging cameras. And they're really going to be focusing on the open land. They spent a vast amount of time yesterday searching the area here, these allotments behind us, and also the wooded area, because this is nearby to where the couple were arrested on Monday night. Of course, they were first arrested on suspicion of child neglect. Yesterday, police said they'd been further arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter. But still in their search, their extensive search, still no sign of the baby. So the search will continue today.
Thank you. Thanks very much. The former Health Secretary Matt Hancock has called an allegation. He rejected the Chief Medical Officer's advice to test all residents going into English care homes for COVID, a distorted account of the pandemic. Let's find out more, should we? Tamara's standing by for us. So in what way was it distorted?
Morning, Kay. Well, Matt Hancock, the former Health Secretary, is facing claims that he rejected medical advice that all care home residents should be tested for COVID-19. And this comes out of a cache of 100,000 WhatsApp messages sent to and from Matt Hancock at the height of the pandemic, which have been obtained by the Daily Telegraph. Now, Mr Hancock says via a spokesman that the story is incorrect and says he was selectively quoted.
I think we've got a problem with your mic there, actually, Tamara, so we're just going to... I hope we can hear you a little better now.
Those messages were obtained by the journalist Isabel Oakeshott, who co-authored Mr Hancock's book about the pandemic that came out last year. So she had all those messages. Now, in one of them, Chris Whitty, the Chief Medical Officer, tells Mr Hancock in April 2020, so about a month into the pandemic, there should be testing for everyone going into care homes. Later in the day, there's an exchange between Matt Hancock and a civil servant suggesting that advice was not followed for people who were coming into care homes from the community, only for those coming in from hospitals, with Mr Hancock saying it would muddy the waters to do it for everybody. Now, of course, deaths in care homes have been discussed a lot. They're regarded as one of the big scandals of the pandemic response. Now, a spokesperson for Mr Hancock told us this. He says it's outrageous that this distorted account of the pandemic is being pushed with, he says, partial leaks, spun to fit an anti-lockdown agenda, which would have cost hundreds of thousands of lives if followed. What the messages do show is a lot of people working hard to save lives. He goes on, the full documents have all been made available to the COVID inquiry, which is the proper place for an objective assessment, so true lessons can be learned. Those who argue there shouldn't have been a lockdown ignore the fact that 500,000 people would have died had we not locked down. And for those saying we should never lock down again, imagine if a disease killed half those infected and half the population were going to get infected, as is happening right now with avian flu. He says the story spun on care homes is completely wrong. What the messages show is that Mr Hancock pushed for testing of those going into care homes when that testing was available. Instead of spinning and leaks, we need the full comprehensive inquiry to ensure we are as well prepared as we can be for the next pandemic, whenever it comes. the spokesman said that he was advised it wasn't deliverable to test everybody at that stage, and so he is denying that story. The Telegraph say that they reveal these messages because it may be years before they see the light of day, because the COVID inquiry has not started its hearings yet.
OK, Tamara for now, thank you. And a reminder that Prime Minister's Questions is taking place today. You can watch that live here on Sky News from midday. Still to come on the programme for you this morning, we'll look ahead to the coronation with Royal Historian Dr Tessa Dunlop and Chief Royal Correspondent Jack Royston. We'll be speaking to PR expert Mark Bukowski about Elon Musk, the disruptor, who's just sacked another 200 people at Twitter. Is he brilliant or balmy or both? And at 9:45, we'll be speaking to Dr David Nabarro on COVID-19 and bird flu. I think it's soon to be Sir David Nabarro. Now, laughing gas, or nitrous oxide to give it its proper name, is the latest craze offering young people the chance to get high. It's illegal to sell it for inhalation because it's harmful and can devastate young lives. But a Sky News investigation shows that the law is being openly flouted. Let's get more on that, should we? It was an investigation by Sadia. I often see these little canisters on the floor when I take the dogs for a walk in the park.
Yeah, and you might be used to seeing these little canisters, but actually young people these days are more and more taking the larger size, and we know that the more you take of this, the more dangerous it is. And that's really what's become more common now. And the London Ambulance Service have told us that they're taking in almost 3 times as many calls and incidents related to nitrous oxide in 2022 than they did in 2021. And we started investigating this about 2 months ago when a doctor told us that nitrous oxide is the single biggest cause for admissions to his hospital ward. Let's have a look at this investigation that we did.
Bad choices stare back at Musa every day. A nitrous oxide habit has left him unable to walk.
Oh, it's stupid. If you want to disable yourself, carry on.
Even 12-year-olds are misusing this drug, which is meant for pain relief in hospitals. Abusing it over time can lead to life-changing injuries.
I started taking them daily because of stress, which was obviously the dumbest thing I could do. I was just taking them, and then in the middle of the night, I go to the toilet. I got up and just fell on my face. I couldn't get up. You got it.
Musa spends most of his day in bed. His body shakes, his vision is blurred.
That better?
And he's lost feeling in his fingers and toes.
You won't know until it's too late. It makes you a crackhead. Makes you a bit of a junkie. I didn't picture me being like this at 20 years old. Definitely not. Don't know how I'd live if the outcome is I can't walk again properly. I don't know how I'd react to that. I swear to God.
And this was Musa's stomping ground. Luminous and luring corner shops. An odd place, one might think, to find nitrous oxide.
We're in Birmingham to see for ourselves how easy it is to get hold of nitrous oxide. We've been given a list of names of shops where we're told you can get the canisters, no questions asked. Let's see.
It's not illegal to sell nitrous oxide to anyone over 18, but it is to supply it for recreational use. Our producer is wearing a hidden camera.
Yes, which one? Big one.
Yeah.
Which one?
How much?
£50.
How much?
50.
30.
Yes.
Okay.
None of the shops check his age, nor do they ask what it's for.
Do you have a bag?
Yeah, I've got a bag.
I put it in your bag?
Yeah, sure, go for it. Oops, sorry.
Here, he's taken to a room at the back.
Is it in the back?
Yeah.
Okay.
Watch how the canister is bagged up for him.
Yeah, that's fine.
And look at what the shopkeeper does next. He gives us balloons.
Can I have my change?
You want balloon with it?
That's fine.
You don't want it?
And in another shop.
You want this or not?
Like getting cutlery with a takeaway.
All but one of the stores we went into simply handed over these canisters, and even though they didn't ask our producer any questions, They also handed over the balloons used to inhale the gas from these.
It's not illegal to inhale, but ministers are calling for tighter controls. That could see more prosecutions, more fines, and tougher prison sentences.
What we don't want to be doing is criminalising users. I don't see how that helps the problem. That's going to drive it underground. I think much tighter action needs to be on the supply chain. This stuff should be sold business to business. It shouldn't be sold in corner shops. Push up against my hand.
Dr. Nichols says he's seeing more and more patients like Musa. He calls it a bigger problem than cocaine.
Seeing young people with completely avoidable, preventable neurological disability is far from a joke. It's really upsetting. And just put your arms up like that for us. Spread your fingers.
This month, the government is set to start consultation on the sale and use of nitrous oxide. Even by the time they do, Musa's doctors say it's unlikely he'll be walking again. Sadia Chowdhury, Sky News.
Fascinating stuff, Sadia. Where can we learn more about this?
So we have a piece online as well, so you can go online and read that. And just to let you, our viewers know, Musa is out of hospital now, but he is still having to use crutches to walk. But he's very happy to know that lots of campaigners are trying to do something about this. And there are calls for things like a ban, perhaps on sale and possession, sort of like the type that they have in the Netherlands, but that's all being discussed. The Advisory Council on the Misuse of Drugs is currently taking in evidence to try and use some of that feedback to formulate an answer for the government.
OK, fascinating. Thanks very much indeed. Thanks a lot. In other news, MPs are warning that NHS England will not meet its first cancer recovery targets. A report from the Public Accounts Committee says the NHS is over-optimistic about what it hopes to achieve and is already falling short. Over 7 million people, a record high, are on waiting lists for elective procedures and cancer care in England. For cancer care, waiting times are worse than ever. Just 62% of urgent GP referrals started treatment within the target period of 62 days, well below NHS England's target of 85%. Last August, 2,600 patients had been waiting more than 2 years to start cancer treatment. The committee's chair, Dame Meg Hillier, says figures are the tip of the iceberg.
Well, we've seen over-optimism on delivery of this recovery plan. And during COVID, there were plans to ramp it up, but they haven't been delivered as they should have done. And we're now seeing 1 in 10 people waiting over 104 days for basic cancer treatment. So, this is just the tip of the iceberg. There are also stretched staff, stretched services, partly as a result of COVID, but they predicted they would deliver this, and they're not. We don't think they're going to.
Well, a spokesperson for the Department of Health and Social Care told us the NHS has already made strong progress in tackling the COVID backlogs, virtually eliminating waits of over 2 years for treatment. We're working to reduce the 62-day cancer backlog, which has fallen 9% since peaking in 2020, but we know there is more to do. Some of today's other headlines for you now. Ghislaine Maxwell has launched an appeal against her sex trafficking conviction. She says she was immune from prosecution and claims her trial was tainted. The 61-year-old is serving a 20-year prison term for helping Jeffrey Epstein sexually abuse young girls. China's accused the US of abusing state power by forcing federal workers to delete TikTok from government devices over cyber security concerns. TikTok has long faced allegations it gives users data to the Chinese government. But China said the US government was exploiting national security concerns to penalise foreign companies. Police have released 4 men who were being questioned about the attempted murder of Detective Chief Inspector John Caldwell in Omagh last Wednesday. 2 other men, aged 47 and 71, are still being held for questioning. Mr. Caldwell remains in a critical but stable condition in hospital. The culinary world is in shock because the man known by many as the best chef in the world has lost a Michelin star. This year's Michelin Guide has downgraded Guy Savoy's restaurant, Monet de Paris, from 3 to 2 stars. It was named the best restaurant in the world by La Liste for 6 consecutive years. Let's have a look what the papers are saying this morning. The Times reporting that Rishi Sunak has appealed to Tory MPs to back him and finally get Brexit done. Thought it already had been, pledging to push ahead with or without the support of the DUP. We'll see about that. The Guardian's front has a warning from Parliament's spending watchdog that a £14 billion plan to reduce NHS backlogs caused by COVID is failing to meet targets. We just heard from the NHS about that one, haven't we? The Telegraph has a story involving the former Health Secretary Matt Hancock and leaked text messages. His spokesperson is strongly disputing that he ignored expert advice during the pandemic. The Daily Mail leads with police fears that the baby of Constance, Marten and Mark Gordon has come to harm after the pair were arrested on Monday night. And the FT leads with the report that Jaguar Land Rover owner Tata Motors is demanding more than £500 million of government aid to build a new battery factory in Britain. More sightings of the Northern Lights have been captured, but not from the usual viewpoints. Here we go. EasyJet passengers on a flight from Iceland to the UK had a great view of the Northern Lights after a pilot made a 360 turn over the North Sea. The manoeuvre allowed passengers on both sides of the aircraft to see the sparkling display in the night sky. Later we'll speak to Dr Francisco Diego from the Department of Physics and Astronomy at University College London to tell us all about the Northern Lights. I should say, if you've taken any pictures of the Northern Lights over the last couple of days, you've been able to see them really well, haven't we, in the UK? Do send them to us and we will share them with the world throughout the course of the programme. You can tweet us directly at @KBurley, or you can use a hashtag #KBurley and we'll be able to find it from there. A quick look at the weather. Conditions remain quiet until the weekend when we start to see some colder air in the north. It's that time of the morning. Here's our climate dashboard coming up right now. There you go. Looking at coal, no coal at all today. A lot of gas, though. Almost 2/3 of our power mix is gas today. Only 17% renewables. And I thought it was windy over the last couple of days, but there you go. This is what we're at now, 1.26 degrees higher than in 1880. And as far as CO2 emissions are concerned, in millions of tonnes, this huge number here in real time, according to the University of Oxford. Looking at other news for you. And here we go. There you go. You recognise them. What were they doing? They were at a spinning class yesterday. The Prince and Princess took part in a timed distance spin during a visit to Aberavon Leisure and Fitness Centre in Port Talbot. They were there to meet local communities and hear about how sport and exercise can support mental health and well-being. Can you guess who won? Of course you can. It was Kate, and here she is taking pride in her winner's trophy. Now, Rishi Sunak is working hard to sell his Windsor framework. Last night, talking to Tory backbenchers in the Commons. Joining us now is Richard Graham, a member of the 1922 committee, which is basically shop steward backbench committee, I suppose, for those MPs who wouldn't have a voice otherwise. And it sounds as though you're all quite happy with this new deal.
Well, I can't speak for absolutely everybody, Kay, but I think I can happily share with you that my own feelings are very powerfully about what a great deal this is, and I think that's the instinct of pretty well all colleagues as well.
You're supportive of the Prime Minister, as you're saying there, but you're aware that not all Northern Ireland unionists are. It's still a battle that he might have to fight. It's not a done deal, in other words.
Well, I think he understood the key way forward was to try and find practical solutions to the practical problems for the people of Northern Ireland, and then try and bring in, if you like, all the political parties to support this so that we get back to the power-sharing form of government in Northern Ireland that's so badly needed. And that means giving those political parties a bit of time to look at the detail of the deal. And obviously the DUP are critical to this. But I think there is a strong feeling that this does make a difference for so many people in Northern Ireland. And I think it's going to be difficult for the DUP to strongly object to this. They will probably say that it's not perfect.
They want 2 weeks to look at the deal. Is that reasonable to ask for?
I think so, and the timing of this is quite good in the run-up to the 25th anniversary of the Belfast Good Friday Agreement, isn't it?
Why is it reasonable to ask for 2 weeks, and yet others have looked through the detail? I'm sure they've got lawyers everywhere looking at it. I'm sure they can do it quicker than that, can't they?
Well, look, I think it's for them to decide, and I think the Prime Minister is very much of the view that if it takes a few days longer for some parties to look at it and decide their view, in the bigger scheme of things, that's a small price to pay for what will be a historic achievement in resolving the issues left over from the Northern Ireland Protocol.
What if they decide they don't like it?
Well, that would be very sad, but we can't sort of deal with the hypothetical issues. They're very conscious, as I think we all are, that we have to have the quality of public services delivered in Northern Ireland that the people of Northern Ireland, deserve, and that means having a sitting government in place, making decisions and overseeing all the public services. And without that, it's very difficult, I think, for Northern Ireland to move forward. So their objections were all about the Northern Ireland Protocol and the fact that in practice, this did mean that goods moving from Great Britain to Northern Ireland were being treated as if they were crossing an international border. And that was obviously wrong. And those are the issues that the Prime Minister, I think, has brilliantly resolved, not least through creating the green lane for goods coming from GB to NI.
But stuff going through the green lane can still be randomly stopped, can't it?
Well, the only checks left will be those to stop smugglers and criminals, so it'll be intelligence-led.
Yeah, but it's still a border if they can do random checks and random stops. And I think you still also have to provide certain amounts of paperwork.
Look, you can do random checks anywhere in the UK if the police believe that a lorry is carrying something which is, going somewhere for which it isn't documented and shouldn't be going. So I don't see that as a huge problem, but you may well be right in saying that the DUP may point to that as one of their residual issues. But the key thing is whether there's enough in it for them to realise that this actually is hugely helpful for their voters and therefore something ultimately to support.
No, but there is bits of paper that you still need to provide. Instead of 80 pieces of information being needed at customs, you'll need to provide 21 pieces. So there is still a border.
Within the green lane, burdensome customs bureaucracy, and I'm quoting directly, will be scrapped and replaced with data sharing of ordinary existing commercial information. So the data sharing is the key to it. Funnily enough, on the Brexit Select Committee, after the election in 2017, we looked at all these things in huge detail. And I remember vividly, I think it was John Thompson of HMRC saying that it would be possible to have a red and green lane with data sharing to get round some of these issues, but that the systems weren't in place. They wouldn't be ready for some years to come. So in one sense, time has proved helpful in the evolution of the technology needed and to be able to show the EU that the data sharing would work and all the rest of it. It's a very practical way forward.
Yeah. I'm not sure if you've had a chance to read your Daily Telegraph yet this morning. What's going on with Matt Hancock? Apparently he rejected Chris Whitty's advice to test all residents going to English care homes from COVID.
Well, no, A, I certainly haven't looked at the Daily Telegraph, and B, this is presumably something going back some years into the pandemic, is it?
Yeah, it's text messages, WhatsApp messages that have been handed over to a third party. They have been trawled through, and now the allegation is, which he rejects, that he rejected Chris Whitty's advice to test all residents going into English care homes for COVID, calling it a distorted account of the pandemic. He's rejecting it, as I said, but if he did do that, which he rejects, and we'll keep throwing that in so the lawyers are happy, where does that leave us when the Health Secretary was not testing everybody that went into care homes?
Look, there are a whole series of questions to do with the pandemic, which will be resolved by an investigation, and Matt Hancock will have to no doubt answer any of those specific allegations from Chris Whitty. And we'll hear, both sides of that view. I mean, I'm much more focused on what's happening today and moving forward, and I think the strength of the Union in the United Kingdom.
Let's go back
the
to
changes
Matt Hancock. We've done quite a lot on the Union. Let's go back to Matt Hancock. Are you not at all concerned and want to know more about that?
Yes, and I'm sure we will.
Thanks for joining us on the programme. Hello again, everybody. Now, you've seen it in slapstick movies. Now a mafia boss has broken out of a Sardinian prison using an old-fashioned method of escape. Marco Radiano, known as Poloni, don't know why. It's interesting, though, isn't it? Scrambled to the top of the wall, knotted together some bed sheets and used them to drop to freedom. 39-year-old member of the Gargano Mafia was serving 19 years for mafia crimes. The prison said it was a very well-prepared escape. He knotted some blankets together. 32 people have been killed and at least 86 injured in a head-on train crash in Greece. Emergency services say a passenger train was travelling from Athens to Thessalonica when it hit a freighter train. Meantime, search is continuing in Brighton for the missing baby of the aristocrat Constance, Marten and Mark Gordon. The couple have been arrested on suspicion of gross negligence manslaughter and are being held by police in Sussex. Where is the baby? That's the question everybody wants the answer to this morning. Now, in May, the King will take his seat at the coronation, but first, it's getting a little bit of TLC. Over time, the chair has survived vandalism by schoolboys, an attack by suffragettes, and it's in much need of renovations. Let me just grab my notes, and I'm going to take you over to have a longer chat about this with the royal historian, Dr. Tessa Dunlop, and chief royal correspondent at Newsweek, Jack Royston. Hi, both. It's good to see you. Thanks very much indeed. Tell me about this chair.
It's got quite a history. Of course, it was originally built around 1300 for this stolen stone of Scone. Edward I, Hammer of the Scots, comes down, controversially brings it from Scotland. Yeah. And it's built this wonderful sort of oak, 2-metre-high edifice to encase the stone. Now, when it was used as a first coronating, not allowed to use that, actually, it's very American, as a chair to crown a king or queen in, that, again, is controversial. We know for certain in 1399 it was used for Henry IV, but there's thoughts that it was certainly used in the coronation in some way from earlier in the 14th century.
Yeah, so some people who are accustomed to, you know, glittering gold thrones may be surprised to learn this is predominantly made out of wood with some gold gilting, gold painting on it. But it's what is so special about it is its extraordinary history. It's the oldest piece of furniture in Britain that's still used for its original function. And like you said, it's just survived all these, you know, vandalised by schoolboys in the 18th and 19th century. I didn't imagine that schoolboys did that kind of thing back then. But yeah, there's people
schoolboys have always done that.
Schoolboys have always done that, and it's the same thing. It was just people, you know, carving in effectively, I was here, and, you know, this in such year, 1800. And it just, I can't help thinking that one day, sometime in the future, there's going to be a future series of The Crown that uses this as a kind of metaphor for Charles, because, you know, here he is, he's survived his scandals in the past as well, just like the chair has survived all these vandalism by the younger generation, and yet it still has this extraordinary role to play in British life.
And does the Queen have one as well?
Well, this is the thing. So there's only been one joint coronation, i.e. when a king and queen of equal standing, both reigning, were coronated together, and that was Mary and William. Of course, Dutch William comes in. And what offends me is that Mary had the greater right to the throne, and yet William sits on the big chair. So there will be another chair, obviously, for the Queen Consort. This has become rather controversial.
Now, is she the Queen Consort or is she the Queen?
Well, they're all Queen Consorts because they don't reign in their own right. They're only sitting on the throne alongside their husband when Charles ceases to be king. Then Camilla is no longer, as it were, part of the monarch in that way. But
can I pick you up on that? So when it was Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother, she was still called Queen Elizabeth, even though she was no longer Queen.
Yeah, she retained the title Queen, but she was no longer part of, attached to the king, the reigning king, so she leaves Buckingham Palace, etc. Therefore, the consort point is significant, but if you're Queen Regnant, like Queen Elizabeth II was, it doesn't matter what happens to your husband. He's your accessory, as poor old Philip was for so many years. But if you are their queen because your husband's king, you are only in that position as long as he is reigning, and that's where the consort part is significant.
Sure.
But of course it just becomes shortened to Queen, and you would become Queen Mary, Queen Elizabeth, etc.
Queen Camilla.
I've got to say, my big distinction was between Princess Consort versus Queen Consort. By the time you're Queen Consort, you're Queen Camilla, in my view. And I think the public will go there. I think there is perhaps a little bit of a transition period where people are getting their heads around it, because even just now when you said the Queen, I kind of initially thought you meant Queen Elizabeth II. And people will feel that way for a long time, but she is Queen Camilla.
But also so for instance, if Camilla outlived King Charles, we would no longer refer to her as the Queen.
Bet we would.
Do you think so? No, because we'd have another Queen, we'd have Queen Kate.
Yeah.
So it would be Queen Camilla, so like Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. And she took a while, by the way. She was quite an ego, the Queen Mother. People always thought she wasn't. She actually really rather liked being married to the King, even though she protested at the beginning. And she took a while, you know, she wore those soft hats and restyled herself Queen Elizabeth, the Queen Mother. Quite a lot to sort of sop to her ego, some of that.
Yeah. Apparently, the grandchildren are going to have a role in the coronation, I'm reading.
Yeah, that's what we're hearing, and I know Tessa has some strong perspectives on this, so I'll let her take over in just a second. But yeah, no, I think they were always going to be there and they were always going to be present. I think it's quite interesting that we're hearing that they're going to play a more formal role, and, you know, yeah, it could bring a slight degree of controversy into it, dare I say it?
I think that's your cue.
I think it's a bit of a poke in the old eye, isn't it, for Harry? He is the son of the king, and suddenly these sort of second-hand grandchildren are coming along. It's a sort of Pippa
That's a bit harsh, second-hand grandchildren.
Well,
they watch us at the palace, you know.
She's the Queen Consort, and these are her grandchildren. I understand they want to be part of the ceremony, and that's right and proper, and given a place on a pew, but I'm not sure about being part of the official ceremony. A lot of people have said, oh, this is blended family, this is modern monarchy. And I hear that. It's not diverse monarchy. A bit like Camilla's companions aren't hugely diverse. I wonder who this is speaking to. It feels really quite home counties. I was incidentally at university at the same time as Tom, and he went through it. You know, it wasn't a great period. Yeah, it wasn't a great time in the early 90s to be the son of Camilla. You know, they've stood by their mother and their grandmother, and they're rightly proud of the journey she's been on and the sort of rehabilitation she's experienced. But I'm not sure that if we're trying to slim down monarchy, this is really serving to that purpose. And I speak totally from a personal point of view. When I heard it, it was being sold very much in some of the tabloid press as this great kind of modern blended family, and I thought it looked quite narrow and a bit slony-pony to me, some of the narrative. And I think, what about including some of the Commonwealth or in the official ceremony, some fresh faces, something that kicks it along a bit?
You brought up the chap who has written a book about being the spare, Harry, of course. Apparently, yeah, there he is behind me. Apparently, they have been evicted from their home, and Andrew will get their new home, or will count it as his new home because they've been evicted.
This is obviously a big moment, and assuming that it is in fact correct, Harry and Meghan, I think we will see a lot less of them in Britain. I think it's really important to remember that there's much more to this than simply a place to lay your hats, because in Frogmore, they had the protection of the police who guard the private estate there. And there was actually, at the time of the Jubilee, they came to Britain and barely left Frogmore because they didn't have police protection to take them from here and there, which is why we only saw them at the official events they were invited to. They had police protection for that, and then they had police protection at Frogmore, and they did nothing else for that reason. So the fact they're losing Frogmore means they may not even feel safe stepping in Britain at all. So if this is correct, then it has mega ramifications for their relationship with the country.
It's got strange optics, though, doesn't it, Jack? Because the narrative, at least in The Sun this morning, is Froxit means that they're relinquishing Frogmore. I wonder if they're going to be paid back or in some way recoup the renovations, the millions of pounds worth of renovations that they then paid. You remember initially the state paid. Yeah. And that Andrew is going to replace them in this small cottage.
But he doesn't want to.
But he doesn't want to.
5 bedrooms.
So, in comparison with,
if it's small or not, yeah.
I think it's about 30 in the Royal Lodge. I don't know. Haven't counted the bedrooms in the Royal Lodge recently, but it's much bigger. It's a sort of wedding cake of a place. But nonetheless, the optics aren't great, are they? Andrew getting Harry's gaff. I know know that they've had terrible polling. I know they've been indiscreet. Their truth hasn't always...
totally trashed the royal
I understand all of that, but he's a man in pain. He's angry, and I just think our monarchy is... I'm a monarchist. It needs to be a broad-shouldered institution, and if we're including Camilla's grandchildren, I want to include them. It's about forgiveness, redemption. It's about finding a way forward.
So you want to see them both in the Abbey?
I want to see them in the Abbey, and I don't really want them... I would like them both there with their children. If Camilla's grandchildren are going to be there, if they're not too little to endure, I think it's going to be 2 hours. Surely a little part of them they can be slotted in and slotted out.
So we have a creche in the Abbey as
well?
well?
Yeah, maybe. Okay. Why not? We're building all sorts of little edifices.
Now.
But I also think Frogmore needs to... I'm hoping that this will be just rumour and gossip, but it may well be the case. And it may be instigated by the House of Montecito, that they want to park all their guns, as it were, on their American lawn, and they're done with
Montecito, meaning Harry and Meghan. That's the name of where they are in California. Do you want to see them at the coronation?
I think it would be interesting to see them at the coronation. I mean, you know, this might not be the kind of thing to say, but it would be really interesting to see the dynamics between them and other members of the royal family. Like, let's say they wind up face to face with William and Kate. Efforts might be made to sit them separately, but let's say they do. I mean, it would be really interesting to kind of try to get a litmus test on how these two couples get along after everything that's happened.
But that's just... I feel that's a little bit soap opera. I just want them there to make sure that our monarchy represents something more than sort of southeast England, which is what it feels like a little bit if you've got... I think they're called Loie and Eliza, and I'm sure they're really lovely girls. I've not got no doubt that... And Charles, by the way, apparently very close to his step-grandchildren. But there is something about Harry and Meghan that speaks more internationally. Yes, flawed, yes, in pain, but makes our monarchy resonate in a broader, more global way. He is head of the Commonwealth, Charles. He does have 14 other realms. I'm really wondering how the coronation is going to speak to people and places outside of Britain.
Well, he's got a 3-book deal, I think, Harry, so he'll need some stuff for the other 2. Perhaps behind the scenes at the coronation.
With the creche.
With the creche. Great to see you both. Thanks very much for coming. I really enjoyed that. Thank you. Now, after days of counting, Nigeria's ruling party candidate Bola Tinubu has been declared the winner of the most competitive presidential election since the country became a democracy in 1990. The 2 opposition candidates have demanded a rerun of the vote due to delays that they say could have caused irregularities. Going to be talking more about that very shortly. Indeed, our correspondent at the scene. Meantime, several thousand miles from home, but you wouldn't know it. Check this out. This walrus has been spotted by a fisherman sunbathing on Scotland's west coast, well away from its traditional Arctic habitat. It's the first time a walrus has been seen in the Inner Hebrides. Is this the same walrus that keeps getting on boats and sinking it in the Dublin Bay? It may be him. I'm not sure. He's nicknamed Thor anyway. He was spotted in Scarborough earlier this year. I wonder if he's the same one. They look very similar, though, don't they? One walrus. How can you tell it from another? Don't know. There you go. Elon Musk sacked more Twitter staff this weekend, including some of his most senior people. He did it by locking workers out of systems or firing them by email. Musk has repeatedly come under scrutiny over the way he manages his workforce. Joining me now is PR and branding expert Mark Bukowski. Hi, it's good to see you. Thanks for joining us on the programme. What's he up to?
Well, he's obviously a very disruptive figure. I mean, he's taken a massive risk with this. He sees this as a powerful platform for him. If we look back at what he's achieved, it's been phenomenal in terms of the Tesla. He's a controversial figure. But let's face it, you know, Twitter is a very powerful medium. Numbers are dropping, but they're still minuscule, but it's losing a hell of a lot of money. And if he's got grand plans for this, and that's probably in his head, then somehow he's got to stem the sort of, you know, the loss of blood, the loss of money that it's going through at the moment. Twitter grew very, very quickly, if we think about it. But of course, now with TikTok, Instagram, Facebook still has more engagement than Twitter. You know, he's got to do something with it. But you can never quite understand what Musk is thinking in his head. But his achievements as a disruptive and builder of phenomenal, you know, game-changing industries in this time, he's a master.
So you think he will take Twitter on to bigger and better things?
Well, he has to, or it's going to be one of the most phenomenal flops we've seen in modern, you know, sort of tech history, I guess. He's determined, but the way that he's treating staff, the way controversially he's bringing some of those disruptive figures like Trump and like Andrew Tate back online, giving them, he obviously is a great believer in free speech. But it's been controversial and it's making news, and he's not frightened of actually being at the centre of that tension. He's an old-fashioned showman in many ways.
Yeah, free speech or free publicity?
Both, isn't it? I mean, if you're going to re-engage with people, you can get those numbers. I mean, Twitter's revenue comes from advertising, predominantly.
I'm getting so many adverts on my Twitter feed now that I didn't get before.
Well, you do. I mean, it is changing, and the same with Instagram. You could argue that, you know, Instagram is not as pure as it used to be. All these apps and whatever, you know, have to, you know, are free to us. They've got to make money. You know, have a very disruptive effect, in my opinion, in terms of democracy and the change that's been brought on. I mean, it's eroded analogue media to such a way. We're seeing the effect it has on younger people. We're seeing Twitter, some would argue, is a pretty profoundly negative influence. But people still use it, people are still connected to it. And that's the interesting thing. As much as we moan and we feel troubled by this, we still engage with it.
Sacking people by email, locking them out of the office, it means that he won't necessarily be able to attract decent people to do the job going forward. Is it possible that Elon Musk could be cancelled? Could
Elon Musk be cancelled? Let's think of all the stuff Elon Musk has done in the past. I mean, even with here, when the famous sort of cave rescue, the unfortunate term he used on that man who went to rescue, called him, you know, pedo guy. And somehow he seemed to sort of get above that. You know, he's played with shares, he's, you know, promoted crypto, smoked a joint live, bigged up things. He's got an incredible sort of survivor complex around it. And, you know, he is a very, very wealthy man. And he's persuaded that this stock to be bought by some influential people around him. You know, you can't write this guy off. And whatever goes forward, and, you know, negative or positive, he's the story. We're talking about him now.
OK, it's good to talk to you. Thanks for coming in to see us. We really appreciate it. Thank you.